to be aware of these First Amendment auditors. They shouldn't be afraid of it if they're not violating people's rights. And if I'm not here, there would be maybe a tyrant, a police state tyrant that wants to run my life and run my family's life.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're having a conversation with Sheriff David Hathaway in Santa Cruz County. Enjoy. David, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. It's great to be here.
For anybody who doesn't know, David is the elected sheriff in Santa Cruz County in Arizona. How would you describe your ideology?
Probably voluntarist would be the best way to describe it. Wanting people, all of society, to be run on voluntary encounters, no coercion, no aggression, just kind of following the non-aggression principle. That price signals would be used to determine all activities between human beings, and if somebody's not voluntarily involved in an action, if they're being coerced, then that shouldn't happen. But I guess to sum it up, I like the word voluntarist.
Would you say that you were a voluntarist before you went into the field of law enforcement or after?
It might be somewhere along the way. I previously was in the DEA and saw all the failures of the drug war and all the tragedy and all the people being locked up for victimless crimes, and just realized that what a waste it was to go after people for just putting a substance into their body. People should have the freedom to what people would call bodily autonomy or bodily sovereignty, be able to do what you want with your own body. I can't remember what great philosopher it was, says a man has no freedom at all if he doesn't have the freedom to drink himself to death. Maybe that's kind of like a bad example or a bad analogy, but it's really true. I mean, you can't attempt to legislate morality or your vision of morality. So I did multiple assignments with DEA and lived in South America for 8 years, participating on the war on cocaine, principally in South America, and just saw all the harm and destruction. And of course, I'm sure you know, Craig, that the U.S. has per capita more of its population locked up in prison and in incarceration centers than any other country in the world, even countries that are described by Americans as so-called totalitarian countries, dictatorships. But kind of the proof is in the pudding. If we have more of our population locked up, can you really say that we're a free society?
Do you think that America has become a police state?
Yeah, I would say so. Because I like to say that the left and the right in the U.S., the Democrats and the Republicans in the U.S. have become like what I would call the uniparty. That, really at the national level, there's very little distinction on the desire for war, for policing the world, for telling people what they can and can't do. Like, I'm older than you, and I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. And back then, let's say, for example, the Democrat Party was about it's my body, it's my decisions, bodily autonomy, freedom to use substances. They were very much against the drug war, and also they were against war in general. Like if you go back to, say, Hillary and Bill Clinton, if you go back to their college days, before they became national figures, they both protested the Vietnam War. They both protested, against, marijuana criminalization. That was kind of back in the hippie days of the 60s and 70s. It was like, we should have the freedom to be able to use drugs. It's my body, my choice. We shouldn't be going to war all over the world, the Vietnam War, trying to tell other countries, what to do and change regimes and things like that. But nowadays, neither on the right or the left do you see any distinction on the main things. Like, let's say, for example, the drug war. The Democrats and Republicans are both bought in heavily to the drug war. Like under Biden's time before he was, president and vice president, his time in the Senate, he presided over all these minimum mandatory drug sentences as a Democrat, very much a drug warrior, and all the civil asset forfeiture where they take people's property away from them, even if they haven't been convicted of a crime, and they leave it up to you to prove your innocence. And the same on warfare. Like you look at somebody like Hillary Clinton in her lifetime, as a college student, she was a protester against the Vietnam War. And by the time she became Secretary of State, She was very much aggressively pushing for any kind of interventionist activity all over the world,
Yep.
in Benghazi in the Middle East, whether it was, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran. She was very much a war hawk. As somebody who started out in the Party as a peace protester. So it's just kind of sad to say that um, kind of universally, let's say at the national level on politics, it seems like nobody stands for anything anymore. They're both in favor of very much a police state. Getting back to your question, look at during Bill Clinton's administration, just to show that he wasn't, you know, non-supportive of the police, he proposed 100,000 more police officers on the streets to be funded by federal money and federal grants, just to say, like, look, I'm supportive of law enforcement. I'm supportive of throwing people in prison. But once again, you go back to his college days, he was protesting things like that, like police brutality. So, about the only hope, I think one good lesson we learned in the last, national election cycle, there's kind of people have lost faith in national level politics, at least with somebody like a sheriff. You can look the guy in the face, you can go talk to him in person, and if he won't talk to you, you can throw him out of office because, it's at the local level, you can actually have some say so with local politics. So I think maybe there's a lot of truth when people say that local is the path to the future. You can actually make changes at the local level. Now, just speaking about law enforcement in general, unfortunately, most law enforcement positions, most law enforcement management positions are not accountable to the people. They're appointed bureaucrats. Like, look at the head of the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, CIA. Look at your local police department. Police chiefs are not elected. They're appointed by the city council and the mayor. So they're not
Yep.
accountable to the people. Really, the only law enforcement official that's accountable to the people is the elected sheriff. And if you go back to the 1700s and the early 1800s at the inception of this country, that's all there was the sheriff. All these three-letter federal agencies like ATF and FBI and DEA and CIA, all these things came out in the 1900s. Like the DEA
Right.
was created in my lifetime in 1973. If you look at the beginning of this country, there was only the sheriff. There was not police departments because in the 1800s, there was a guy named Robert Peel in England. He invented the idea of a city police department. They did it in London, and then they replicated it in the US, in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. This idea of a city police department, an unelected, unaccountable to the public law enforcement agency. But if you look at the beginning of this country, all civil and criminal law enforcement was handled by the sheriff. And it wasn't a patrol function. It was where you go and you file a complaint with a local magistrate or a judge, and then the sheriff was an officer of the court. He was the arms and legs of the judge, and he would carry out the judge's orders. But it wasn't a patrol function going out just looking to hook people up and randomly charge them with things, contempt of
Yeah.
cop or whatever else.
I think that I had heard that you were doing something very interesting as far as relationships with the federal government goes in your department. I know in my local law enforcement departments, they have what's called a joint federal task force. Some of them with the FBI, some of them with the DEA, some of them with God knows who. And I believe that you have taken steps to make a difference in your department. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah, based on the lessons I learned as being a member of management with DEA, started as an agent, and then I did 8 transfers in my career with DEA. The last 5 of them were supervisory assignments. And so I presided over these very task forces that you're talking about, and they're made up of state and local officers, uh, personnel donated by police departments and sheriff's offices and the state police to these quote unquote federal drug task forces. So um, what happens is there's always strings attached. They'll usually give some money to the local department to get them to donate personnel, but then they turn over these personnel to the federal government to do federal priorities, not state priorities. Now, let me zoom back a little bit to my position here geographically. I am in a border county in Arizona, the very bottom of Arizona, right in the center.
Okay.
And in my county are the largest ports of entry with Mexico of any of the border counties in Arizona, and the
Wow.
largest, also the largest border patrol station in the U.S. and the third largest border patrol station in the U.S. are in this county. And there's also a very big DEA office here. Um, so, in order to have control, to have oversight of the people that work for this office, I didn't want there to be strings attached with the federal government. Now, when I came into this position, and I've only been in this position, Craig, for 2.5 years, but when I came into this position,
Yes.
there was a personnel from this agency, from my sheriff's office, contributed to a federal drug task force. They didn't come to work at my sheriff's office. They went to work daily to a federal
Oh,
agency, and they reported to a federal supervisor. So there was
wow.
contractual arrangements that are kind of hard to get out of, because they had given equipment like vehicles and
Right.
other funding. There was obligations with evidence storage and things like that. So it took me about 2 years to get to the point where I could undo these contractual arrangements. In federal bureaucratic parlance, there's things called MOUs, that means memorandums of understanding, things called IGAs, that means intergovernmental agreements. So I was able to undo those things and get us out of this federal drug war, where I had 3 people from this office that were contributed to the federal task force. And then I had no idea what they were being asked to do. They were sent out of this city, out of this county, to do whatever that federal agency wanted them to do, and typically leaving this county on these federal investigations. So that was one of the priorities I had when I first came in. It took me a while to do. What have I done to push back on the federal things? There's been other things I've done too, like
Okay.
they put a spy blimp, the federal government, Homeland Security, put a spy blimp tethered over this town, the county seat of this county. It's called Nogales, Arizona, anchored about 2 miles from the border, and it had downward facing video cameras that were like just surveilling the people in the community. And I made a big stink in the media. Like, you can go to YouTube and see some of the interviews I did. There's a good one by PBS that I did, talking about how this is becoming a surveillance state and a police state.
You'll find it floating above Nogales, Customs and Border Protection's new eye in the sky near the U.S.-Mexico border.
It just appeared one day out of my window of the sheriff's office. It was a total surprise, this, what I call the spy blimp. And I worry about the implications of the loss of privacy, like looking into residential communities and spying on what we're doing. As an American, I think we have that fundamental right to be private and secure in our private lives. And this is just, another big brother intrusion into our lives. I'm offended by it personally. I think it's disgusting, and I hope the community doesn't get used to it and just think it's one more fixture of the growing police state along the border. And I kept making a stink in the local media. Some of the people didn't like that. Oh no, this will make us all safer. I don't know how Americans, the land of the free, the home of the brave, have gotten used to this Orwellian Soviet style surveillance and police state. But, like I said, there's been, huge, large federal agencies here. The federal officers outnumber 30-1, the local officers. So anyway, I was actually able to hound them enough to where they actually removed it from this area. Another battle I had was with the governor of Arizona. He wanted to militarize my county. He wanted to send National Guard troops to my county. But there's a federal law called Posse Comitatus, that says military troops can't be used to perform domestic police functions in the U.S. So what he had to do was get a sponsoring law enforcement agency. And since the elected sheriff is the quote unquote chief law enforcement officer for the county, I can bless or deny any activity, ostensibly even for the federal government. So they're supposed to inform me about any search warrants they're doing in the area. But so he contacted me, and there were 4 border counties in Arizona, all 4 border sheriffs, and said, how many troops, can I send to your border? And I said, none, because he needed me to sponsor. And my local merchants, the retail businesses, and the residents, they don't want this to look like East Berlin. They don't want it to be militarized guys, federal troops with machine guns and Humvees going through the streets of this town. So I said, no, I don't want any. And it became a big battle with him, and I turned it down. Unfortunately, 2 other border sheriffs did accept those troops. into their county. And another thing he did that I fought back against, he decided that he was going to go on federal land and build a border wall using these shipping containers, these
I
40-foot
saw
shipping
that.
containers. And
Yeah.
so I joined the protesters against that. And my family is historically ranchers since the 1800s, 5 generations since before Arizona was a state. Arizona became a state in 1912, and I still have ranch property. And they were going and messing up the scenery and just putting these ugly things and going in on actually national forest public land with no permission from the federal government. And the federal government even sent them notices saying what you're doing is illegal. And the federal government actually sued the Arizona governor, but they went in with these big, heavy tracked vehicles. And the terrain is like kind of rolling terrain and mountainous terrain here. They were flattening out these areas and stacking up these ugly, rusting shipping containers on top of each other and then putting razor wire on the top of that. So I joined the protesters on that issue, and eventually they lost their lawsuit and they were ordered to remove all the containers. So they spent $200 million of Arizona taxpayer money to actually put those containers there. And then after me being very vocal against that, joining the protesters, we got those removed, and it's back to the pretty landscape that it was, except for some scarring where they went with heavy equipment and bulldozed the hillsides. I actually threatened to arrest them. They were just contractors. There weren't any government people out there. Arrest them
Right.
for dumping on public land, illegal dumping on public land, which is what it is. You couldn't just go out there and set up a mobile home or dump some junk out there.
Right.
That's a
Was that
crime.
about all
So,
that they had to hear before they said,
yeah,
okay,
because
we're
they were
done?
moving to my county. They weren't in my county yet. They were up to about 6 miles away, moving to this county. And I said, we're going to draw a line in the sand. And if you do this when you come into our county, unfortunately, the sheriff from the other county was all about creating a war type environment, like militarizing these border counties,
Yes.
which I wasn't about that, but that's how he gets his political points. That's how he gets his votes, is by scaring these old retired people. Arizona has a lot of retired people, Craig. So they come here from other states, and you'll get these local
Right.
politicians to scare them about the border when it couldn't be farther from the truth. It's very peaceful. And then they'll vote for the guy who scares them. We need more cops. We need more DUI checkpoints. We need more cameras spying on the people. So unfortunately, that's how a lot of sheriffs run their campaigns.
So you said that 2 other counties did actually let the government come in and put in these storage containers on their border, right?
Yep.
Were those counties, are they on either side of you?
Yes, they are. And there's one is Yuma County, which is all the way to the west, and one is Cochise County, which is all the way on the east side of Arizona. And after I did the protest, they removed them in those counties as well, because the it was under the state government, and those sheriffs were supportive of the containers, but they took all those away as well when I successfully protested that.
On the phone the other day, you told me that you have to attend these sheriff's conventions where you interact with a lot of other county officials that work in law enforcement.
I think maybe one of the ones I referred to whenever we talked on the phone was Salem, SALEM, Southern Arizona Law Enforcement Management. But there's
That's
also
it.
there's the Arizona Sheriff's Association. There's the Southwest Border Sheriff's Coalition. It's another group of border county sheriffs. There's the National Sheriff's Association, and these these groups are typically political entities disguising
Okay.
themselves as official spokesmen. They're just 501c3s, 501c4s. They don't have any governmental authority, but they will issue proclamations and press releases
I
from their
understand.
agencies that are very contrary to the freedom message. Since they make their money by being part of the police state, they're obviously going to champion things like, we need more budgets for law enforcement, we need to militarize this country and make more of a police state because it's so scary out there. And they're not about letting people live their own lives. Like, I have no desire to run anybody else's life. You want to own guns, you want to build a business, you want to, whatever you want to do, that's up to you. You want to, smoke marijuana,
Absolutely.
whatever it is. Yeah, but that was the one I think I mentioned, the Salem.
I mean, do you feel comfortable at all even just referring to what you had heard from other elected officials about what people refer to commonly as First Amendment auditors?
Yeah, that exact word was used on the last meeting I went to with that organization, to be aware of these First Amendment auditors and talking about strategies to deal with them, because they're kind of caught off guard by the fact that you're actually filming them and capturing them, what they're really doing. And if you get footage or recorded audio where they are violating people's rights, obviously they don't like that. They shouldn't be afraid of it if they're not violating people's rights. But I think also during that call, we mentioned, Craig, that there had been a law passed recently in Arizona that you couldn't film the cops. And they had a distance requirement. It was like 8 feet or something like that, but subject to interpretation by the officer, where they could make you stop or seize your video equipment, which they'll routinely do anyway, even if there is no legal authorization for them to do that. But I think I also mentioned on that call we had that the courts fortunately overruled that. And I don't know how they got the legislature, both houses of the Arizona legislature, to pass a law that's very anti-free speech, anti-First Amendment, and they got the governor to sign it, and both houses of the legislature. And that was during a Republican governor and Republican dominated legislature. And it surprises me that I think in other areas Republicans would describe themselves as the freedom advocates, and they don't want big government. They want responsible government. They want limited government. So to me, that should
Yep.
mean government oversight, looking for waste and fraud and abuse and all these buzzwords that they like to throw out there. But then you make a law where you require that nobody can film the cops, and the courts overruled that, saying it's clearly unconstitutional. And another weird thing that they did during the legislature that had, I think it was 1 year ago or 2 years ago, it was while I was sheriff, that they haven't overturned yet. There's some sheriff's offices will appoint citizens oversight councils. So you can have an oversight committee for any allegations of police abuse, for shootings and assaults involving police. But the legislature in Arizona and the governor signed off on it. They didn't want anybody that wasn't pro law enforcement on those committees. So they made a requirement that you had to have a significant number of hours of attending a police academy to make sure you're appropriately brainwashed, that you're appropriately pro law enforcement, and you get taught about all these things like qualified immunity, where uh, the cops have a presumption of innocence, and even if they are guilty, they still have their qualified immunity. So they have to be trained on all that stuff at a law enforcement academy by law. This is a new statute, before they can be part of a civilian review committee that would be like me as sheriff. I can deputize whoever I want, and I should be able to choose just random people from the community. They could even be from activist groups, people that are interested
Right.
in doing oversight on government activities. I should be able to appoint people like that and just say, okay, um, if we have a review of allegation of misconduct, I should be able to have, say, 3 members of my staff and 3 members of the community of my choosing to review that activity. They can review body camera video or whatever else there is, and make
Right.
determinations like, should we take disciplinary action against this officer? Should we fire him or give him days off or demote him or whatever? But they made sure that you can't have anybody from a group that's really interested in monitoring the police. They have to have proven their colors, proven that they've, gotten good passing grades, that they're a good conformist, that they've gone to a police academy, and they've made it through
That
with
really
flying
is
colors.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is that's shocking, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I was not aware of that. So thank you for letting us know that.
Like, you
So
wouldn't be able to get a First Amendment auditor that really is on the lookout for police misconduct. You couldn't get somebody like that on one of those committees. So it gives, for
right,
appearance's sake, it gives the facade that we're bringing the community in. This is not just the cops judging themselves, because like, if you give an entity the ability to review its own conduct, then it's always going to come out like, no, we didn't do anything wrong. But it gives the appearance that you're bringing unbiased outsiders in. But this new law makes it makes it sure that they will be biased in favor of law enforcement before they can be on a committee like that.
In other counties is probably going to be a bigger issue. I'd assume that if one of your staff misbehaves, you're very quick to realize that and whip them into shape.
Yeah, because I would have the authority to do that unilaterally. So yeah, you're right.
As the chief law enforcement officer in your county, how do you interpret the Second Amendment?
Well,
I use the word interpret
yeah,
as a kind of a joke.
Well, there's kind of two perspectives here. The Constitution is written pretty good, better than what you could get nowadays. If these people, I think it's kind of funny when these people want to call for another constitutional convention and thinking they would get a larger preservation of freedoms than what they had back in the 1700s. And I'd be like, no, I don't think it would come across nearly as good as it's written right now. But,
Absolutely not.
I actually believe in just, the market determining everything, and that people have absolute rights. But let's look at the Second Amendment about, you have the right to the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, that's really clear. And actually, Arizona has really good gun laws. It's always ranked up near the top with the NRA when they do their annual list of the 50 states. Like in Arizona, you can have concealed carry without a permit, open carry without a permit. You can own a machine gun. There's no state law against that. You still have to deal with the federal laws if you're going to own like a machine gun or a silencer or something like that, or what they call a destructive device, which would be things like hand grenades and things. But there's no state laws on any of that stuff, on any types of ammunition like tracer ammunition or armor piercing ammunition. So it's right there at the top. But you still have the federal laws on that. So my stance is just, yeah, I would, absolutely 100% strict construction, constitutionalist on that. Although I do think the Constitution has things that do take rights away from people.
Yes.
But, the First Amendment's written real good. Second Amendment's good. Fourth Amendment's good on, to be secure in your personal effects and in your home. Fifth Amendment's good, right against self-incrimination. From that, you can derive the right to remain silent and things like that. So yeah, I would absolutely not cooperate with the federal government. If then during the COVID era, it was actually during my campaign for this position. I'm replacing the longest serving sheriff in Arizona. And so during my campaign, it was right during the COVID era. And I came down hard against the mask mandates, social distancing mandates that were shutting down businesses. Our county board of supervisors said there's a limit on how many people can congregate or assemble together. If there's more than 10 people, you had to ask their permission. So during the campaign, I was making it very clear that I would not enforce any of that, that you have a First Amendment right to assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And all these churches were even shutting down here. We can't assemble with more than 10 people. And businesses were shutting down. And I said, this is unconstitutional. And there were 6 candidates running, because when this guy who'd been in office forever and he was considered to be unbeatable, when he decided to not run, everybody and their brother wanted to run. So there was 6 candidates running, and I went down hard against the mask mandates and the social distancing and shutting down businesses and occupancy restrictions. And a lot of my supporters told me, look, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You should be quiet about this. And there was a debate where they had all the candidates there, and the chief superior court judge for the county was the moderator for the debate. And, a whole bunch of the people in the county were watching. They got to that question, and they gave each of us a chance to answer. If somebody tells you, I'm not going to wear the mask, and this is when this county had a mask mandate and the city here had a mask mandate, what are you going to do? He says, I'm not going to wear it. Every one of the other candidates during that forum, that debate, said they would arrest the guy. They'd charge him with a crime. And I said, I was the last one to answer. I said, absolutely not. I wouldn't do this. People have bodily autonomy. These things are proven to harm your health. You're sucking in these fibers. And there's already, at that time, there's already proof of mold and bacteria colonies that would grow on the mask, indications of pneumonia because the moisture in your lungs can't expel, and that buildup of moisture causes pneumonia. There had already
Yes.
been incidents of accidents on heavy machinery where people were wearing masks and they had oxygen deprivation and carbon dioxide poisoning. So I mentioned all that, and the local paper here did a huge hit piece on me. They tried to crucify me, and it set the record for the number of online comments. Usually their articles get one or two comments, but it had over 300 online comments on that article. But I even had relatives telling me, look, you shot yourself in the foot, you should have just gone along with it, wear the mask, support the mask. And my answer was, well, if the voters are that dumb, I deserve to lose. So when it came down to the election, 6 candidates, when it came down to the election, I had 4 times as many votes as the guy who came in second place. So that shows you the message of freedom does resonate with people.
I'm sure that the other 5 candidates were betting on the citizenry being stupid, and you were betting on the citizenry having a brain, and it turns out that you won. And that is so encouraging to me, at least.
And that's what you call the silent majority. Like the
Yes.
vocal people would be, yeah, wear a mask, you're going to kill grandma,
Yep.
and all that kind of stuff. So that's what you would call the silent majority was just going along to get along. Yeah, they'd wear a mask just because they didn't want to be criticized by other people, but they're thinking to themselves, this is ridiculous. Why are we going through this? But they weren't vocal about it. They didn't go and complain publicly. So this small percentage of loudmouths gives the impression that everybody wants to force their neighbor to wear a mask, but it's not true. The bulk of the population, the term I've heard is the silent majority, actually like the message of freedom, even if they're not vocal about it.
To whether or not you have had any experience with First Amendment auditors in your county, and if you encourage their presence in your county in the future.
Oh yeah, I like that. With my particular department, I've only seen one time where one of the deputies was approached by a First Amendment auditor, and it seemed like he did pretty good. He was patient. He didn't tell the guy, turn the camera off. Um, he tolerated it, and he talked to the guy, and he interacted with him. But yeah, I would encourage that. Like I was telling you on the phone, I just like when they'll do something like get a camera and just walk into city government offices, just filming as they walk down the hallways, and just say, hey, how you doing? We're just here hanging out, talking to people. And then when they get people to approach them and say, you got to turn that off. And, oh, why? Why is that? Is there a law against that? It's just, First Amendment, free speech,
Yeah.
am I breaking a law? And those I like that because there's a lot of just this kind of assumption of authority or preeminence of government officials over the regular people. But the rules apply the same to everybody. If you have the freedom to speak or interact, why is that any different if you're talking to a government official? But yeah, I like that. It keeps people on their toes. And I like just the general phenomena that everybody has a portable TV studio in their pocket these days. So, cops in general are aware that they're likely to be on video at any particular time. And I think it's funny, like after a major incident, how they try to run into the crowds and grab all the cell cameras, but still there's a lot of footage that'll surface anyway that they didn't get all the cell camera video. So I think that's good in general to keep cops more upfront.
Since the conception of the mobile recording device, how have you seen law enforcement change? I mean, even the DEA was a form of law enforcement. How have you seen the law enforcement just community, the profession change as a whole over the past 2 decades or so?
Well, there's the awareness that you're always being watched and likely, videotaped. Like when I first started out in law enforcement, there weren't there weren't even cell phones, there wasn't that idea was not even the cameras were still film cameras. So they had to spend a lot of money to develop film. They're not going to just be wasting film running a camera all the time. But nowadays, I mean, you can have a dash cam or something just running all the time that's doing kind of an endless loop type thing, deleting the old footage, but preserving the last 24 hours. You kind of just assume that things are going all the time. Like there's been shootings here in Arizona where uh, the video is captured of the shooting just from somebody's dash cam, or somebody just whips out their cell phone and
Right.
starts doing it. So there's that kind of general awareness. Um, in some ways, it could be bad where cops are more secretive, and but
Yeah.
you catch a cop doing something secretive, then it looks bad. But I think in general, it's good, just the awareness that people are being filmed. And if you were saying if anybody in my department, I'd have to look it up and see, but I think there was a deputy named Kent. I don't know if you'd be able to search that, uh, that was caught by a First Amendment auditor. But it's not particularly sensational. I think he does a pretty good job. But I don't know if you
Yeah,
just
and
search
that's
YouTube.
always a good thing. If it's not a sensational First Amendment audit, then that means that they generally did a great job.
And I think the bulk of what we could call First Amendment auditor activity in my area would be with the federal government, because we have two Border Patrol checkpoints in the area, and we have the biggest Border Patrol offices in the nation here. And Border Patrol has very much a presumption under Supreme Court laws that they can do whatever they want. They can stop anybody, interrogate anybody, search anybody's car. Unfortunately, there's been 3 Supreme Court rulings that have said that Border Patrol does not need probable cause to pull you over and search your car if you're within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So they call that "quote unquote" extended border search authority, according to the Supreme Court language. But that 100 miles of within the national borders covers 2/3 of the population of the U.S. It covers places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, Chicago, New York, Miami. So
Really?
they, yeah, people in the freedom movement call that the Constitution free zone. Um, so the ones that are more abusing the rights of residents of my area are Border Patrol, our federal agents. So, not to say that there's been no First Amendment auditing activity in my area, but it's primarily been related to federal agencies. Yeah. And I haven't given any advice to, I mean, if a First Amendment auditor came up to me, I would just kind of enjoy it, because it would be like, I've been interviewed by, you know, Scott Horton and Tom Woods, and all the big freedom podcasters, Spike Cohen and all these people that I always enjoy talking about those things. And in
Right.
my day-to-day life, I don't get that many opportunities. Most of my friends in the freedom community are out there somewhere. So if somebody just walked up to me and wanted to just start talking, I would think like, "Hey, neat, I'll stop what I'm doing and take my
Yeah.
time and talk about freedom issues." But I haven't given out any advice to, the deputies in this department
Okay.
on how to interact. I would just hope they'd be behaving as they should, no matter who they're talking to, if somebody's got a camera or they don't.
Fair enough. Yeah, and that's very reasonable. And I actually think that's very funny that you say that, because I'm the same way, right? We don't get to talk about this stuff with your everyday people. So, and you have a lot to contribute to that conversation as well. You're more knowledgeable than me and than most people that I listen to on freedom. So it's great, especially a sheriff that knows about, or that is passionate about a market-based system. That's the cornerstone of freedom, in my
And
opinion.
and of course, something like a sheriff's office is not a market creation. Like,
Right.
in economics, they have what they call price signals, where people vote with their dollars, and you get more of what you want and less of what you don't want. So there's no market signals to say whether my sheriff's office or any sheriff's office should be bigger or smaller or not exist at all. Maybe people want to provide their own security. So, you know, to me, that's somewhat of a paradox with me being a voluntarist, and maybe it would sound somewhat hypocritical, but my position, the reason I have this position is because I have extended family relatives in this county and we own property. And if I occupy this position, it keeps a tyrant from coming in that would take my guns or take take my property or make me wear a mask or something like that. So I'm kind of just looking at it like, yeah, it's not a market creation. I would agree. I would prefer that all things were market creations, like that people decide on their own decisions on how to do security. Do they do it themselves? Do they hire a private security company, or how would they do it? But I just look at it like, well, the position exists, and if I'm not here, there would be maybe a tyrant, a police state tyrant that wants to run my life and run my family's life and take my guns away. So if I'm here, then there's somebody who won't do that to you. So that's kind of
Right.
my reasons.
Right, absolutely, David. And you were in the sheriff's department for a while before, and I don't think that you had anything negative to say about the sheriff before. Was he a pretty decent man as well?
Well, he was good on some things.
Yeah.
He was the kind of the big issue here. Sometimes I do 20 interviews a week on this subject, and I don't think I ever do interviews with the local media on any subject other than the border and immigration and things like that. The reason for that is that the federal agencies will not do interviews at the local level. Any media requests, they will refer to their public information officer in Washington, whereas I like to be transparent and I'll talk to anybody. And I've done them all, Fox, PBS, NBC, CBS, ABC, foreign media. I speak Spanish. So I've done Telemundo and Univision and Azteca TV. As a matter of fact, there's no English media in my county. All radio and TV is in Spanish. So most of my interviews are in Spanish, but I've done, the ride along interviews with all the major US media and foreign media as well. But back to my predecessor, he was good on the border issues, the free trade. We have a sister city in Mexico right across the border from us. And there's a lot of economic activity in our area that benefits the whole US. Like more than 50% of all the produce, fruits, and vegetables that's consumed in the winter in the US comes across this border through my county. That's the main industry, trucking industry. Americans don't realize there's not a growing season in the winter in the US because
Right.
we're a northern climate. So if you live in Illinois or New York and you get your tomatoes and your mangoes and your lettuce and everything, it comes from Central America, and that comes across my border here. That's the big industry here. And there's also a big there's plants, automotive industry plants in Mexico that do the wiring harnesses. For what little is left of the U.S. automotive industry depends on the relationships with Mexico. So there's a lot of commerce back and forth. Some people, Americans, are naive and say we can shut down the entire border. We can do all this ourselves. But there's terminology in economics called the division of labor. Everybody has a specialty based on, you may be closer to the ocean, so you can obtain fish cheaper than I can. I may live in the mountains in an area that's good for growing grapes or fruit trees, and I have an advantage in that area. Or you may have an advantage where you have people in your country that need jobs, and you offer them employment. And so a foreign company may come to another country and put an assembly plant there. So the previous sheriff was very favorable to the relationships with Mexico, as I am.
Okay.
I promote all the free trade,
Right.
but we have other sheriffs that are very hostile to the relationships with Mexico, and they want to shut down all contact with Mexico, thinking, no, America can make everything and grow everything that we need. This kind of isolationist attitude that we don't need foreign, trade with other countries. So yeah, he was good on that aspect. He was, what I would say, not as good on other things. Like he thought there should be more
Okay.
gun laws, that we should um, take people's guns away and have more ability to look into gun owners and what they're doing. And of course, I'm the opposite on that. I'm just a freedom guy across the board. So but he was good. The big issue for this county is the relationship with Mexico, free trade, free commerce, and he was good on that.
Are you familiar with Article 2, Section 6 of the Arizona Constitution?
If you could tell me what it says, that would be great.
Yeah, it says every person may freely speak, write, and publish on all subjects, being responsible for the abuse of that right. And I assume that it means every person being responsible for the abuse of that right. And the way that I would read that is every person is responsible for protecting it, right? That's
Oh, okay.
that's
Yeah.
the way that I would interpret that if I Sorry for being unclear.
No,
My
so
question is,
if you saw somebody pulled over for drunk driving and it's not you, but you as a bystander, you start filming that to make sure that their rights are protected. Yeah, that makes sense.
as a sheriff, do you feel that you have a heightened responsibility to be a vigilant defender of everybody's rights? Not only to not violate them, but to defend them as well.
I would think so, because there's the presumption that the government has extra authority, which we should all be equal, but there is that presumption that the government has extra authority. And then if people are given this presumption of extra authority, there may be the temptation, if there's no consequences, to abuse that authority. And all these things like qualified immunity that I think shouldn't exist. Me being aware of the people who have extra authority, and me having the ability to do something about it, where you would not have the ability to officially, under the color of law, do something to a cop who's abusing your rights. About all you can do is expose the abuse. But I would think
Right.
so. I think in my position, there'd be more responsibility, because I could actually do something. I could see an innocent victim whose cell phone was taken away from them, and it may have exculpatory evidence that would prove that person's innocence. That, yeah, I mean, I could do something about it. I could go require that that phone be returned to that person. So yeah, I would think so, because another person doesn't have the ability to do anything official, and I do.
Yeah, and that's a great answer to that, man. That is I share your viewpoint on that. I really do, because I agree. When I see stuff going down, about all that I can do is just stand there and watch, and it's a helpless feeling that you have. But right, with great power comes great responsibility, and it's just so great to see somebody in your position who's willing to accept that responsibility and take that on. And it's been really great. So thank you for coming on the show today, David. I know that I'm not as a smooth interviewer as Mr. Tom Woods, but this isn't my normal thing. But thank you for coming on to the show, and hopefully you'll hear from the people that watch it, and they can express their gratitude to you as well.
Okay, and feel free to give out contact information for me. I'll give it out on this video. I have an email that's real easy. It's just sheriffdavidhathaway@gmail.com. No punctuation, no weird spelling, just sheriffdavidhathaway@gmail.com. And I'd be glad to hear from your viewers. But yeah, it's been great fun, Craig. Thank you for having me on.
If you have a noteworthy interaction with government, you can send me a video or reach out through my Facebook page Hendry or my Gmail account. Links are in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and tell me what you thought in the comments below. You can further support the channel by becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching. I will see you in